Welcome to our video on site visits. In this video, we will go over assigning and approving site visits in the WebGrants system. It is critical that you have watched our previous videos on managing grants and negotiations. This is a subcomponent of the grant. Now, you can also do organization level site visits, but the majority of the site visits we see done are at the grant level, so per grant. This is also sometimes called monitoring. So there's a couple of setup items for all subcomponents that you have to do. So I'm going to go ahead and first take you in and show you the funding opportunities. We're going to go to funding opportunities. I have that one open here. So this is a funding opportunity I'm going to use today. Because site visits is a grant subcomponent, we have to go to the grant tab first. Remember, we don't have to use all of the subcomponents. All of the subcomponents, may not apply to this particular funding opportunity. If you want to use one or you need to use one for this particular funding opportunity, you first have to make sure you have added the document to the grant tab of the funding opportunity. So that part's really easy. You just determine which subcomponents you're utilizing. So you can see I have site visits added into the grant tab of my funding opportunity. Now from there, if you determine that you're going to use a subcomponent, then you have to set it up. It is a document that consists of forms. So if you're using it, then you'll then go to that tab. I'm going to go to the site visit tab, and you have to have your form set up here, and they're all driven by type. So as you can see, I have said no matter what site visit, all site visits are going to pull this form. But you could set it up where you have multiple forms that are driven by different types. So depending on what type of site visit, you'll get a different form each time. But you have to set this up first before you can utilize it. The second portion of the setup before you can utilize site visits is, of course, the user roles. The people have to have access to do the site visits. So you can have a person that's assigning the site visits and then a different person that's the actual site visitor. These are typically not the same person. The person that is also going to be approving the site visits will not be completing the site visit themselves. So this is a document that works a little bit differently than the other subcomponents. If you kind of think about the other subcomponents, the main, subcomponents like a claim, a status report, an amendment, those are usually initiated by the grantee, right? They'll submit in a claim or they'll submit in a status report. And then you internally would go through, maybe get some corrections on it, and go through the approval process. But a site visit isn't like that. The grantee doesn't initiate it. So you'll see that this one works a little bit differently. If I had to compare it to anything, it works more like the review process, how you're assigning a reviewer in the system, a review of an application. This kind of works the same way. We're assigning a site visitor a site visit on a grant. So we're actually going to assign it to someone. That someone's going to go out and complete the site visit. And because it's assigned like that, it's not going to let that same person that went out and did it turn around and approve it. So it's at least two people. You could have the assignor, the person that's assigning it, turn around and approve it once it's submitted in, but that approval person can't be also the one that's doing the site visit. So I typically don't see very many levels of approval set up for this if like a site visit is done internally, because a lot of site visits are, completed by an internal user. And it may not necessarily be the program officer on the grant. You could have an actual designated person that's the actual monitor that goes out and visits these sites and checking on this project. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's an on-site. You could do a desktop visit, like a virtual visit, or just a checklist of items. And sometimes those desktop visits are like pre-site visits almost, and they're assigned to the grantee. So it's not necessarily an internal user that can be the site visitor. It's important to understand, though, that person has to have access rights to be a site visitor. Okay, so the next tab I have open are two different people I'm going to show you just an example setup. So I've got my internal user that I'm going to log in with. And if I click on the roles for this person, I can see they're a global admin, but they also down here have the assignor role. So they're going to be the one assigning the site visit. They can also turn around and approve at level 1. Okay, well, You can have up to 5 levels of approval on a site visit. Where is that determined? Again, that's back in your funding opportunity. Your funding opportunity controls it all. So in my funding opportunity components, I currently only have somebody set up to approve at level 1. If I need level 2, I'd go find somebody else, and that'd be my level 2 person, make sure they have access to approve at level 2. But if I don't need 2 levels, I am going to make sure I set my rules in my funding opportunity before I start. So I'm going to go down to my approval rules, and for site visits, you can see it's already set for 1. You can have up to 5 levels, but then you have to assign them to the appropriate staff. So my funding opportunity is ready to go. So is my assignor and my approval person. Now the person that's going to be the actual site visitor, so the person that's assigned the site visit, I've actually set that up as my grantee. Like I said, it can be internal or external. It doesn't matter. They just have to have that access assigned. So in this case, this is the grantee on the grant I'm going to use, and they have the assigned rule. So they're going to be the site visitor assigned. A typical external user only has the grantee rule. So this is additional access that you would grant them if you do have external users doing and completing the site visits. So our setup portion is done. Wanted to show all that. Now we get to jump into the grant. Okay, so here I am at my grant. I'm getting ready to assign a site visit to be done on this grant. Okay, so I have site visits here. That's because I added it to my funding opportunity. So I'm coming in as the assigner. I'm going to come in and click add. And this is where it looks more like the review process. The site visitor actually completes it kind of like they did the review as well. So it's the workflow for this is very similar to review. So we're really just going to complete the general information. It's very important to note you do not complete the site visit form from the grant. The rest of the subcomponents, we completed it from the grant. Again, usually that's the grantee initiating a claim or a status report and so on. This actually has a My Site Visit module from the dashboard that the site visitor will access. And that's mainly because a site visitor may not have grant tracking access. In this case, the site visitor I'm using, they will have access to their grant because I'm assigning it to the grantee. But there are many scenarios where you actually have a site visitor that's, that's their job, and they don't necessarily have like full system access. They can't just go in and search, for all the grants. So it actually creates them as a site visitor, and they do it right from their dashboard. So all that being said, all we have to do as this assigner is complete the general information. And it's really important, again, that you know where your forms are sitting and what type. I happen to have one form for all types, so it doesn't matter which type I pick. And these types may be different on your system. You can always add more types to your system as well, depending on your needs. But if I had set a form and set it for annual site visit, I would make sure and only select that type. We don't want them to have a blank site visit. In this case, it was set to all, so I could choose either. So it's your type and your date that are the most important things here. Obviously, you can't assign it. You can't leave it blank. You have to assign it to somebody. So this is all you have to do as the assigner. So we're going to go ahead and give them a due date. Let's say 2 weeks, but this could be, this could be 6 months out. This could be something that they just have to do one time on this grant, and it's clear in the future. I'm going to go ahead and go 2 weeks on my due date, and then I'm going to locate the person. This is going to pull up the people's database here. So I'm going to go ahead and find my person. This happens to be the grantee. So I locate them in the people's database, and then I'm going to click Save. At that point, I'm done. I walk away. Again, you don't complete it from the grant. That's just how you assign it. And my part is done as the assigner person. So as that due date approaches, that person will get these reminder alerts that they have a site visit assigned to them and it's coming due soon. So whenever they go, like especially if it's on site, they can't just do that right away. They'll log in whenever they're on site and ready to fill out this form. So I'm going to go ahead and log in as the grantee. Now I'm in as the site visitor. What's really cool is if the deadline was within the next 30 days, it shows up right on the dashboard, so you can see I can get to it from here. But I want to show you what it did. Because I have site visit access and I've been assigned one, I actually have the My Site Visits right on my dashboard. And that's what I was referring to earlier. The site visitor doesn't necessarily have to have grant tracking access or even full system access. They could just be a site visitor and do it all from their dashboard. So they'll find the one that they are getting ready to complete, and then all the high-level information on this grant would be provided for them here, and then their form down below, and the form is dependent on what you've built for your site visitor to complete. So I'm going to go ahead and edit. Again, I'm logged in as a site visitor. Another thing you'll notice that's different with this subcomponent is, again, because I may not have access, like full access to the system, I may not have access to all the areas, it's providing some information for me. So these two items at the bottom are not forms I have to complete. It's informational because I can't, go dig around. I can go see this data. I can see the funding opportunity and details on the funding opportunity. But as you can see, that's a flat copy. It's just informational. And there's this little check here that says I don't have to mark it as complete. My actual form is right here. In this case, I called it Simple Site Visit. And it's a very easy form in this case. Fill that out. It looks like I have an attachment section as well. That's not necessarily required. But I would enter my data, fill out all the required fields, mark it as complete. Once all my forms are complete, in this case I only had one, I would then submit in the site visit. So my part as the site visitor is done. That also triggers an alert. So if you are the person managing the site visits and approving them, you would subscribe to that site visit status change alert, and that would trigger an alert letting you know that was submitted in. So I'm now going to log in as the actual person that will approve the site visit. It's also right on my dashboard as well. So I could have went to grant tracking and did a site visit search, but it's also on my dashboard. If I'm an approval person and have subscribed to the alerts, it's right there. So now I have all the previous options I saw in any other subcomponent. So I can negotiate and send it back for corrections. I can withdraw it, copy it. Here's my approval, add internal notes, provide feedback, and then I have editing rights because it's on my side. That's why I have all these buttons. If you're ever looking at a site visit that hasn't been submitted yet, it's perhaps assigned and it's sitting out there and editing, you'll notice that you don't have these buttons. It's not on your side yet. It's still on the site visitor side. So now it's been turned into me. It's submitted. So I can look through this, see what they have said, and if there are findings, maybe they noted something, major, I can maybe give them a month and do a finding report that's a totally different type of report where I'm asking for lots of documentation. Or I could even ask them for just to correct this one in like 30 days and open it for negotiation. It's really about your process and what you need to do. Ultimately, the final status on a site visit is approved or not approved. A not approved site visit is not how you get corrections. So if this is something they need to take action on, you would negotiate it and send it back to the site visitor. If it's something that you're noting that it's, out of compliance or something like that, you can actually use the encumbrances or set a compliance item right at the organization level. Again, it depends on your own process on how you're going to handle, if you have found something on site that is wrong, that you need to take corrective action on. Not approving a site visit is just saying it's not approved, which would mean you require another site visit of the same type. You'd make the site visitor go back out again. And I guess that could be a way of saying, again, it's your process, but it could be a way of saying, it was unacceptable. But we're really talking about what the site visitor did at this point. So most of the time you're going to get corrections if you just need more information and maybe something's missing, then you would send it back that way. And that's, again, negotiation. We've seen this throughout the entire system. It does work the same way. So I can choose to unlock it, and if I do, I'll give them a due date and a message. It actually puts this document in correcting status. It would unlock it for the site visitor, and then they could submit it back in. Then I would have 2 versions of the form in the version history. So we've seen that already, so I'm not going to make you watch me do that again, but I am going to go ahead and go through that approval process. So once everything looks good and you have everything you need, you're going to go through this approval process. Now, I only set it up for 1 level of approval. So this is my final level of approval, and it tells me that here. If you have more than 1 level, you would go on to the next, and the notify next would appear here. That notify next drop-down box only shows when you have more than 1 level, and it will automatically populate itself based on the people that have access to approve this document in this program at that level. So it really narrows down that people's database to only the people that can do it. So that's really helpful. If you would ever see a blank notify next, not like this where I don't have to do it, but you do have to do it, but it's a blank drop down, that simply means nobody has access in the system to approve at that level. And generally you'll only see that like on a brand new system if you just recently went live and maybe you didn't set up all your people during training with the appropriate roles. So that just means go back, set up your people with the correct roles, make sure if you're requiring 3 levels of approval that you have that many people set up to approve at those levels. So this is my final level. It takes all levels until it will change it over to approved. In this case, this is the only level. So when I click save, it's going to go ahead and switch it over to approved. And that is the final status. So this is done. It's tracking my approval here. If you ever see that this is blank, this last submit date and last submit by, that just simply means it did not go through a correction process. You'll always have your initial submission and who submitted it, time and day. But this, as if I would have went through that negotiation process and they resubmitted it, it would show when they resubmitted it the very last time. So I just didn't go through a correction process. It was approved on this time and day by that person. It's also tracking down here who did it, time and day, and their comments that they would have added. So that's a grant site visit. Now, a little more recently, we've added organizational level site visits. Because your forms are still very much controlled by the funding opportunity, you'd still have to have a funding opportunity. That's where your forms are going to sit. So I've had a couple clients that do site visits at the organization level, meaning they do 1 site visit per organization, and that organization may have many grants, and they're not going to go out and do a site visit for each of their grants. They do it at the organization level. It's very different types of requirements for those clients, but what's really important to understand is that process of the site visitor having the role set up and all of that is the same. How the site visitor actually completes the site visit, it all functions and works the same. It's just at the organization level in the organization database instead of at the grant level. But the most important thing to understand is you still have to have that funding opportunity. And I've had some people go, well, we do them, per cycle. Maybe it's this cycle, this funding opportunity. But an organization can have like 5 different grants under here, and it's easier to do an organization level site visit instead of a 1 per grant, And so they'll just use their yearly funding opportunity for their organization site visits. But I've also had some other clients that will set up an actual funding opportunity that's never intended to be posted. And maybe they'll even put it out there in archive status and leave it out there. And it's truly just for organization site visits. It's just holding the forms. And you can put, if it depends on your need, but if you have a need for organizational site visits, you might have many forms. So it would hold all your forms associated to all the types. So again, I'm going to take you back to the funding opportunity. In this case, I'm using 1949, so I'll go to that funding opportunity. So same funding opportunity I've been using all along here, and same concept. I have to have the forms. Now I don't have some toggle or anything like that for, turning on organization site visits. It's there if you need to use it. If you don't need to use it, then you just don't use it. It's just as simple as that. So that's nice. The setup is the same. You have your forms set to the type. Now the difference here is instead of going to the grant, we're going to go to the organization that needs the site visit. So I'm going to head over to the organization database, locate the organization. Here's the organization, and up at the top there's this tab, site visits. So I'm going to click add. You can see this one's already had some site visits completed. And now I'm going to again locate the person and the due date, except this one has 2 steps. Again, those forms are controlled by the funding opportunity. Since an organization isn't associated to a funding opportunity, this is where you're going to choose the funding opportunity so it knows which forms you're wanting the site visitor to complete. So I'm going to go due date. Again, I'll give them 2 weeks, but it could be further out. I'm going to locate my person. And then select my funding opportunity in the box. And again, as the assigner, you just have to do the general information. That's it. You're not going to complete the site visit here. Now, in step 1, I selected the funding opportunity. So it's going to go, okay, that funding opportunity has these types. Right? So it's looking just like it did at the grant. Right? It narrowed it down the types for me. I'm selecting the type. That'll drive the form that shows up. And then now I'm done. And so that sits out there in editing. Okay, so again, the same process now for the site visitor. They're still getting an alert triggered to them, and they still go in the same way. It's right from their dashboard. So now I'm going to log in as a different person. I'm now the site visitor again. And it's here on my dashboard and the approaching deadlines if it's within 30 days. And again, I go to my site visits. So this part is the same. So now you can see an organization a site visit doesn't include the application information, because we're not doing it on like an application or a grant. We're doing it on the entire organization. But I do get the funding opportunity details. That's, of course, what drives the forms. But here's the form that I want the site visitor to complete. And you can see, because I'm using the same funding opportunity, I'm getting the same form. And then I mark it as complete and submit it back in the same way. So now the approval person will be alerted that this site visit was submitted in, and then they'll go through the approval process. So I'm logging in. It's going to follow the same rules that my last one did, because those rules are set up in the funding opportunity. So I'm logging in as the approval level 1, and I'm going to again go to the organization now. Not the grant, but the organization. It'll tell you which organization it was in the alert you received. It would also show up on your dashboard. So I'm going to go to site visit, look at the submitted one. And again, our process from here is the same. Go through the approval, enter any comments. Once I've met my final rules, it is then approved. So you can do 2 types of site visits in the system, and it of course depends on your program's needs and requirements you have, but they're both available for you to use. Okay, so this concludes our training on site visits. Thank you for watching.